So it was a pretty busy day for me today in terms of work. And then when I got home, I kind of chilled out, listened to Bongino podcast, which is still probably my favorite audio podcast. And I sort of haven't been able to keep completely updated with everything that's going on. you know, so many things to do, and yet so much going on. And really what is progressing this week is that the Joe Biden candidacy appears to be unraveling even before it begins. Okay, so this is not going to be the subject right now, but I guarantee you a lot of this scuttlebutt over what's going on with Joe Biden is going to be a major topic for the next few weeks at least, because people are going to be wondering whether the person who is most well positioned to be the centrist candidate in the 2020 election is actually going to be able to get his campaign off the ground, because they keep they're keep surfacing women who claim that they've had inappropriate encounters with Joe Biden. And I still don't think it's fair to basically trust the accounts of people without physical evidence. Unfortunately, with Joe Biden, you know, claiming that everybody has the benefit of the doubt and the presumption of innocence, I think his credibility is certainly a problem, because there's so much video of Joe Biden touching little children in very awkward and kind of disturbing manners. So, I would say that I don't really believe Joe Biden. Okay, that's my personal feeling. I don't know if we can necessarily convict him of anything. I don't think that what he's done is necessarily criminal yet, but he certainly is contradicting the sort of trend that people within progressive and liberal America and beyond that, I personally think that when you have a leader who is in a position where they can dictate to people what to do, they shouldn't be able to take liberties with other people's personal space. It may shock you that I'm going to say what I'm about to say, but I think people who are, women managers, I think they have a little bit more of a difficult job, especially if they have a lot of men who report to them, because they have to balance kind of the male egos of their subordinates and try to and often their male subordinates will be in conflict with one another. That's actually why women managers are actually a little better, because they're able to sort of see beyond the ego. They have a little bit more of a conflict resolution um, attitude towards dealing with their employees, as opposed to sort of laying down the law and but I'm generalizing here. Anyway, the topic has nothing to do with Joe Biden. I know we're already, let's see, 3 minutes in, 4 minutes in. Cory Booker apparently has been uh, he's been exposed by, well, maybe he exposed himself, no pun intended, but he apparently did attend AIPAC in a more private capacity. He didn't really appear in front of a crowd, but people are now apparently coming out and saying, well, it looks like Cory Booker made an appearance there at a kind of a private meeting with AIPAC VIPs and things like that. It says Booker spoke with members of AIPAC's New Jersey delegation during the three-day gathering, despite a campaign by progressive advocacy group Move On that called on 2020 candidates to snub the event. Cory was the subject of some fake news, AIPAC President Mort Friedman said, according to The Intercept. An organization threatened a number of presidential candidates and said, don't show up to AIPAC. I immediately got a call from Cory's office saying, well, obviously Cory's going to be there. Cory stands with the state of Israel, and Cory stands with the U.S.-Israel alliance. So this is news from both Fox News and, more closely, the direct reporting from on this came from Alex Emmons of The Intercept. And yesterday, or 2 days ago, technically, I did criticize one of the Intercept reporters, Ryan Grimm, because I believe he produces fake news. He produces stories that don't really matter. But this is kind of an issue, okay? It's an issue not just if you disagree with the Israel-U.S. relationship, okay? I happen to think that AIPAC, regardless of the fact that their model of advocacy is something I don't agree with, I think that they certainly have the right to assemble in the U.S. I think that these accusations of dual loyalty, they don't necessarily hold much water in terms of both legal and ethical questions in the United States. Okay, it's very rare that you'll have people question the loyalty of people of dual nationalities in the U.S. Now, I understand that there's a little bit more of a auspicious presence of Jewish politicians in American politics. I happen to be Jewish. I personally don't think that the presence of Jewish politicians in Congress or whatever has been a help to the Jewish community. I think it's actually made things in fact worse. The values reflected by a politician like Steve Cohen, I think he's a congressman from Memphis. The values and policies that he promotes don't help the Jews in America, and they don't help Jews around the world, and they don't help Americans in general. And that's why I don't support it. And I'd rather vote for somebody who is of any religious persuasion that agrees with my positions, rather than a person solely. Bernie Sanders ran in 2016. I had a friend, I've probably mentioned this before, who said, well, he's Jewish, you're Jewish, you should vote for him. Well, there happened to be an Indian American running, and he was Indian, my friend. There was an Indian running named Bobby Jindal, and I said, well, then are you going to vote for Bobby? And the guy basically was like, he gave like this smirk, like it was the most ridiculous thing I said. But it's the same issue. If a person's ideals don't really agree with you, you shouldn't support them. I don't think you should. For example, if you're Chinese American, you shouldn't necessarily have to support Andrew Yang. Now, I think that there's probably plenty of reasons people would. Okay, and I think I respect people's decision to vote for candidates, even if they're candidates that I happen to hate. I don't hate Andrew Yang, but I'm just saying that if it's a candidate that I happen to really dislike, I'm not going to force people to go along with my point of view. I'm not a Clinton supporter. So anyway, they actually caught Cory Booker on tape saying that he basically here's the actual sound recording of it.
But I do want to thank Omar for his leadership and his friendship. He and I talk often, text message back and forth like teenagers, and I am grateful for him. And I'm grateful to look at this audience and see a lot of faces I've known for years, and a lot of folks who have been partners with.
So let's hear that again.
His friendship. He and I talk often, text message back and forth like teenagers, and I am grateful for him. And I'm grateful to look at this audience and see a lot of faces I've known for years, and a lot of folks who have been partners with mine in forging forward and strengthening and deepening the U.S.-Israel alliance. This policy conference is unique.
So this is the Intercept audio recording. They might have had. I do believe that organizations like the Intercept have people who are moles inside of other organizations, or they taggle, or even with Cory Booker's staff. That's possible. But there's nothing wrong journalistically with that. You have to think it's the same thing that James O'Keefe does, and he's on the right. Well, the Intercept happens to be on the left. I don't have to agree with the Intercept's politics in order to say, well, this is legitimate forms of journalism. I never actually watched the Al Jazeera documentary, the Lobby, which is about the Israel lobby. But if people want to accuse people of deceptive journalistic tactics like doing undercover reporting, you have to realize that that's part of the way that you discover, problems in the world. You do have to have people go and use deception in order to kind of discover information that could be relevant to the general public. Okay, does that necessarily validate the politics that they have? Not necessarily. And I think a lot of this stuff is up to debate anyway. And I happen to come out on the other end of the debate from The Intercept. But why am I saying that this is an important issue? Cory Booker does stand to benefit if Joe Biden is forced out of the race for his sexual harassment allegations. And therefore, Cory Booker would probably be the most centrist of the candidates left in the race. Kamala Harris might also be another candidate of a similar tenor, and she does appear in the Fox News article here. She came out to the event and apparently met with a number of these people, or she met with them at her office with members of the California AIPAC delegation. And in my opinion, that's really the problem with AIPAC. AIPAC is an organization that they want their position to be a bipartisan issue. And it's understandable why that strategy would be successful. But I would say that I don't want a policy to be supported by people who are otherwise basically scumbags. Okay, you have people. Kamala Harris is a horrible person. Kamala Harris is she's first of all she is in favor of locking people up for many years. She has been in the past. She flops on the death penalty. She is somebody who is basically just a snake in the grass. Will say anything to get elected. Now she's talking about reparations. In the past, it was ridiculous. These are things that I think voters have a right to complain about. You have to be consistent when you're talking to the voters. If you're not being consistent, then you shouldn't expect people to vote for you. And that's really the problem with people going and meeting in private at these AIPAC conferences, when in public they kind of show virtue signaling that, well, we're not really going to go this year. I think that basically AIPAC has become like what they were trying to do over the past few weeks was try to make this weak gesture that AIPAC was kind of chilling the conversation and limiting freedom of speech. Okay, so you have to pick one. Okay, either you think AIPAC is a bad influence on American politics, or you think that they do provide a valued perspective that could help you and the United States go forward. You can't have it both ways. You can't support and oppose something at the same time. That is the problem with politicians today. Now, the GOP, they are out and out supporters of AIPAC. You can disagree with them. You can think that it's ethically and morally wrong, but you can't fault them for putting themselves out there as boldly in favor of AIPAC. They are much more, I'd say, in tune with the AIPAC perspective. Given, of course, in the past couple of weeks, there was this Golan Heights acknowledgement of Israeli sovereignty on the part of the Trump administration. They're also pulling these. They're pushing these bills to, I guess, restrict BDS activism for organizations if they contract with the government. That's something I've sort of written against. I think it's not really something that I think is necessary at all. I think that if companies don't want to do business with a country, it shouldn't preclude them from having business with the state. Now, is it unconstitutional? Apparently, from some interpretations that I've received from some people that have sent me material, it's not really unconstitutional, but it isn't, in my opinion, in the spirit of freedom of speech. If you're talking about the broader idea, I'm not just talking about the constitutional statutes. If a company doesn't want to do business with a country, I don't think there should be laws to sort of proactively exclude them. Okay, does that make sense? So I'm not trying to support people who have this visceral hatred of Israel, but I'm also trying to give them the due space and freedoms that everybody else enjoys. And I think if you do that, you see less violence and extremism. You see more people who are able to put their stuff out there. And if they're wrong, people are able to go out and debate them. That's what people aren't doing. They think that if somebody says something that's disparaging and or false or in some cases incites hatred, okay, they think that the answer is to automatically silence them. Okay, if unless they are actually causing harm to you, for example, inciting actual violence against you, I think that the best way to fight somebody's bad ideas is to promote your own ideas. That's really that's the main difference between myself and AIPAC. I also don't believe in the foreign aid relationship. I think that every country's sovereignty is dependent on its own ability to stand on its own abilities, merits, and productivity. So, no, I personally don't really support AIPAC, but I have a lot of friends that do, and I think that they have the right to free speech, just like their opponents have the right to free speech. So, with that being said, it is absolutely correct for The Intercept to call out people like Cory Booker for trying to basically talk out both sides of their mouths. They want so. They were complaining here. This paragraph is kind of funny. So they talk about Trump more bluntly has tweeted in support of a Jexodus, a so-called Jewish exodus from the Democratic Party. But survey data does not suggest that Jewish voters, most of whom vote liberal and Democratic, are flocking to support him. So that's the real problem I see with The Intercept. See, what they have an issue with is Donald Trump. And, this Jexodus movement is largely a result of certain people who have created an environment that's hostile to certain ideas within the Democratic Party, namely the support of Israel. And then as sort of an added side effect of that, there's some feeling among certain Jews that they're no longer welcome because of their Jewish identity in the Democratic Party. Okay, now whether that's a real problem or not a real problem, there is sort of this movement among some erstwhile Democratic voting Jews to leave the Democratic Party and vote, for Republicans or not even vote at all. So The Intercept somehow thinks that survey data, let's take a look at it. They cite something from the Washington Post. And typically they think that the Washington Post is not really worth, what the fuck is going on here? So I had to... Anyway, so they cite the Washington Post, which claims that Jews are not necessarily leaving the Democratic Party. Now, why would they think, after all of the fake polls from 2016, which also were skewed against Bernie Sanders, who's basically The Intercept's boy, why would they think that survey data shows that there is no Jewish exodus? I don't think that polling among ethnic groups is very accurate anyway, and especially among Jewish Americans, it's very... Yeah, I personally would say that there is a trend, and you're going to see a lower share of Jewish Americans voting for the Democrats this year than has been in the past, although whether it's really significant is a good question. There's not that it's a small group. It's not, as a demographic, Jewish Americans are not that big. So one final note, a lot of these people who are anti-AIPAC have used as their standard bearer people like Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar is a Somali-American congresswoman from Minnesota who's probably been in the news a lot for the past couple months. And in many ways, I think that the coverage of hers is a bit sensational. I think that, while certainly she's a dishonest and in many ways completely partisan actor, and she's an open borders, pro-immigration, anti-gun, pro-transgender in some cases, pro-Islam legislator. People don't care about that, but suddenly when she talks about the state of Israel and AIPAC, people get a huge they get some sort of Charlie horse, and they start to get really bent out of shape about it, including, for example, Dave Rubin. While I understand that some of his reaction was obviously, first of all, her complaints, I think, are, they're also exaggerated. AIPAC does not necessarily control foreign policy in the U.S. because the fact is that the Iran nuclear deal did pass, and that was in a Republican Congress. That was with the Senate in Republican hands under Bob Corker and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and then there was the full Senate under Mitch McConnell. It still passed. Barack Obama still got his Iran nuclear deal through, and that was completely against AIPAC's wishes. Okay, so people can object all they want to AIPAC's influence in the United States, and I certainly see where there's like a lot of there is a lot of. I have a problem with AIPAC. Okay, this is me. This is somebody who served in the IDF. Okay, I think that they are doing a bad job at many things, but am I doing a better job? I think that we're talking about apples and oranges. So certainly I think that this conversation has devolved into a lot of finger pointing. But Ilhan Omar is now facing a campaign finance probe, and this is from WJLA. I think they are from Washington D.C. It says Representative Ilhan Omar, Democrat of Minnesota, the controversial freshman House Democrat, is soon to learn the results of a probe into her campaign spending as a state lawmaker in Minnesota. Sinclair has learned. Sinclair is a chain of local news stations, with authorities there having recently completed their investigation and preparing to issue rulings in a pair of complaints Omar faces. The complaints were filed last year while Omar cruised to election to the House of Representatives by Republican state lawmaker Representative Steve Drazkowski. In referring Omar to the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board, Drazkowski alleged that Omar improperly spent close to $6,000 in campaign funds for personal use, including payments to her divorce attorney and for travel to Boston and Estonia. So if she traveled using campaign funds to Estonia, it would be really interesting how she would justify that. As far as Boston's concerned, I'm not sure. It could be for some campaign-related event. Even though, I mean, why would you be traveling to Boston if you're supposed to be campaigning in Minneapolis? Drazkowski's filing of the two complaints followed an earlier episode in which Omar repaid $2,500 for honoraria she received for speeches at colleges that receive state funding, a violation of ethics rules for Minnesota lawmakers. I had observed a long pattern, Drazkowski told Sinclair in an interview from his office in southeastern Minnesota. Representative Omar hasn't followed the law. She's repeatedly trampled on the laws of the state in a variety of areas and gotten by with it. Approached by Sinclair as she left the Capitol on March 28th, accompanied by an aide, Omar refused to answer any questions about the campaign finance allegations. So this is ironic. Now, I think the Republicans are two-faced about campaign financing too. And this is a broader issue. This is an issue of all of the lobbying groups. I think that there was a proposal. This was a great proposal in the past that politicians should wear basically NASCAR jumpsuits with all of their sponsors, decaled on it to show the people who really is the power behind the throne. Who are these people really representing? Because they're not representing average citizens. They're representing, in many cases, they're lobbyists. Okay, and these are lobbyists for big pharma, big oil, for the Qatari government, the Israeli government, China sometimes, and yes, sometimes Russia. And by the way, in past years, it was perfectly legal for Russia to lobby in the U.S., Turkey as well. So let's stop with the whole issue of demonizing people. Even Omar, I don't think we should necessarily conclude that she's the Antichrist or something. But there is certainly an issue here if she's been using campaign funds to deal with a divorce claim, or I guess divorce court expenses. I don't know if you call it a divorce claim. The aide suggested Sinclair try to schedule an interview instead. When Sinclair contacted Omar spokesman Jeremy Sleven for that response, he directed that the inquiry be routed to his personal email account. An inquiry subsequently sent to that account produced no reply from Sleven. The Minnesota Campaign Finance Board, following standard practice, declined to confirm or deny whether it has opened an investigation into the subject of any complaint. So I'm wondering when they're going to actually announce it. That would be interesting. Obviously, now Minnesota is under the command of a lot of hardcore Democrats, including they have a new governor. I'm not sure. I don't know much about their new governor, but their attorney general is what's his name? Keith Ellison, who is the previous representative from Omar's district. So even if she were to be cited for this, it's possible that Keith Ellison could drop the charges because he would simply say, well, this isn't in the state's interest. Within weeks of her ascension to Congress, Omar swiftly became one of the most controversial figures in Washington, following a series of comments she made about Israel and its supporters, etc., etc. So I think you guys get the gist of it. I will try to put this in the comments, all the sources, but I think that's it for today. We might do a little more content about this issue with Booker and AIPAC, as well as Omar and some of her campaign financing issues, as well as all of this saucy garbage about Joe Biden, the creep, finally getting the sunlight he deserves. That's about it. Please like, share, subscribe, and also subscribe to me on BitChute, as well as on Gab, at Starscream85 on Gab, at Chef Leopard on BitChute, Twitter, and Minds.com. And I'll talk to you guys later. Have a fantastic Tuesday.